California is set to send the personal information of gun owners to researchers. The NRA reschedules its oversight meetings and an interview with the head of San Diego County gun owners. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast.
I made the devil run. I gave him poison just for fun.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also the founder of TheReload.com. I'm here with contributing writer Jake Fogelman. I feel like when I say contributing writer, it comes out weird. Every time I listen back to it, by the way, Jake, I don't know. What do you think, Jake? Contributing, like it sounds like Reuter. I don't know why.
I haven't noticed it.
Jacked up on steroids. Maybe because I edit the podcast, I'm always noticing it.
Sure.
Noticing the weird things or the weird inflections in my voice. Maybe it's that like Delco Philly accent creeping in a little bit.
Could be.
Anyone who watches Mayor of
Contributing
Easttown.
Wooder.
Yeah, I guess. Contributing water. Yeah, hoagies and all the good stuff. I think they call it hoagie mouth is the common term for it in Philly. This sort of elongated O's that we have up there. But anyway, Jake is here again with us. We're going to have a good episode this week. We've got Jim Garrity. No, that was last week. Boy. This week we have the head of the San Diego County gun owners, which is an even more insightful conversation, I think, as she gives us, her name's Wendy Hoffman, she gives us insight into their activism there at the local level. So we're getting a little more granular this week in our interview. I think it gets really interesting, frankly. But before we do that, I want to talk about the week's gun news. This week, we found out, right, that the NRA has scheduled their oversight meetings. You know, they had to cancel their annual meeting, which is the big event that usually draws 80,000 NRA members to a city for a big convention. There's exhibit halls and concerts and speeches from politicians and all this stuff that goes on, and then on top of that, there's also the members meeting and the board meeting, which are where members and directors have an opportunity to, give input on how the organization is being run, offer, resolutions to on different issues, on how to change things or how they want to see reforms happen or whatever the case might be. And so they have to do those. The annual meeting, they don't have to do by their bylaws, right? They don't have to have the exhibit hall or the political speeches, but they have to do these meetings. And so they've rescheduled them for Charlotte, North Carolina on October 2nd, which is it's about a week from when this podcast is going to first come out, at least for the members. By the way, if you aren't yet a member, you should join because you get this podcast a day early. And you'll also get access to a bunch of exclusive content written by me and Jake over at TheReload.com. But so the meetings are going to take place, the members meeting and the board meeting in Charlotte, North Carolina on October 2nd. That's the big news of the week. They got these oversight meetings, and they're coming at a time where the Attorney General, New York, Letitia James, who's called the NRA a terrorist organization in the past, even before she became Attorney General. While she was running, she ran on a campaign of shutting them down, and now, she's trying to do exactly that in this case in New York, trying to shut down the organization, dissolve them, and spread out their assets to other groups if she's successful in shutting them down. Now, of course, behind that effort are some very serious allegations of financial malpractice or malfeasance from top NRA executives, including CEO Wayne LaPierre, the general counsel John Frazier, and then the former treasurer Woody Phillips and former chief of staff Josh Powell. They're all four of those are named specifically in the suit, but she's arguing that those executives essentially took millions and millions of dollars of NRA money over the last several years and diverted it towards their own personal expenses, oftentimes for luxurious private flights or wardrobe or trips to exotic locations. So the allegations are very serious and they're very detailed. She put in a 187-page amended complaint this week, or not this week, just a few weeks ago, and the NRA actually filed its answer to that new amended complaint, where they asked for a number of the charges to be dismissed, and, you know, again, attacked James. A lot of it was very similar to what they've said in the past about the case, which is, you know, again, that James is a political opponent who's out to shut them down, and she's trying to silence their membership, and she, you know, so they're accusing her of having political motivations, and that the NRA has made reforms to correct any mistakes that did exist within any sort of corruption that was there, or you know, any mistakes that were made, they claim have been rectified, even though obviously 2 of the 4 people named in the Attorney General's lawsuit are still employed by the organization, including the Executive Vice President, CEO Wayne LaPierre, who is obviously the head and the face of the NRA, is still certainly in charge there, and enjoys really broad support from the board of directors, from everything that we can see, outside of some dissent from a number of directors over the last couple of years. The majority of the board that shows up, and frankly, a lot of the board don't show up to board meetings, but the ones that do overwhelmingly are still supportive of Wayne. But yeah, so what, Jake, it's been an interesting week for the NRA. I think that it's going to be more interesting next week to see what comes of these oversight committees or hearings, if anything.
Right.
It should be interesting, the board meeting as well. You know, in years past, you've seen sparks fly and arguments happen over the direction that the NRA is taking. And so in light of this lawsuit and these scandals, it'll be interesting to see if anything happens, you know, at this meeting. Like you said, most of the directors that show up to these meetings are generally in favor of Wayne and will probably, you know, stand behind him. But it should be interesting to see if anything comes out of it.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how many people show up. This is actually, you know, now some of this, obviously it's hard to blame the NRA to a certain degree. They had to cancel their annual meeting where these were supposed to happen because of rising, you know, incidents of COVID in Texas,
Sure.
where they were going to have it. And so now they've rescheduled it relatively quickly here. It's only been a couple weeks, and they're already going to have it in a different city in Charlotte. So it's you wonder how many actual NRA members are going to be able to make the arrangements to show up at something like this. And oftentimes at board meetings that I've attended in the past, you know, there aren't usually a lot of people who aren't staff or directors that actually go to those things. You know, the members meeting is specifically for members, whereas the board meeting, members can attend that, but it's not necessarily for members. They don't really have a specific role in the board meetings. They have more of an active role in the members meeting. So we'll see if that draws more NRA members in. But honestly, even the emergency board meeting where they met to discuss the bankruptcy filing, because you know, Wayne LaPierre had filed the bankruptcy unilaterally without telling the board about it beforehand, without notifying them or getting their approval. So after that happened, they met in an emergency meeting to go over whether or not they wanted to, you know, I guess back this play and approve the filing or not, and which they ended up doing. Again, overwhelmingly of the board members who showed up. Now, I think it was about 40 members, give or take, who showed up to that meeting out of the 76 who are on the board. And this is a emergency board meeting about the group's bankruptcy. So you sort of give you some insight into how popular these meetings are, even with the actual board of directors who have a fiduciary responsibility to the organization, which means they could be held personally liable for decisions that the group makes, in theory at least. And so it'll be interesting to see where that goes and how many people show up, and whether there's any real big news that comes out of it, because oftentimes the board meetings, there's not like big news that comes out of these things. So we'll have to see. I'll be there in person to report on what goes on. But the other interesting thing in that analysis, that filing that they did this week in court in New York, that the NRA as an entity filed, is that it put some distance between itself and Wayne LaPierre and these other executives who've been named in this suit by essentially saying they aren't accused of enriching the NRA, they're accused of enriching themselves. And so that even if, and that's an important caveat, I did a whole analysis piece on this that's available for the members, where I get more in depth on what this filing means and what they're actually saying in this argument. But one of the key phrases here is even if. So they're not admitting that Wayne or any of the other accused executives did anything wrong necessarily. They're not admitting that the Attorney General is correct in her allegations against these executives. What they're saying is that even if that were the case, right, even if the court holds that these executives did commit, these various crimes, or diverted these funds towards their own personal expenses, that wouldn't necessarily implicate the NRA as an organization and wouldn't be a good justification for shutting down the entire 5 million member group, which is something that critics have, essentially said that the NRA's lawyers should be arguing. Frank Tate, who's trying to intervene in the case as just a regular NRA member, has been critical of the legal representation from the Brewer firm. And this has been one of the criticisms, that they aren't representing the NRA well enough when it comes to points where the NRA's interests differ from what Wayne LaPierre's interests are, in court. And so here you have them doing that, making that argument sort of a due diligence kind of thing. Like, hey, even if you find that Wayne or Josh Powell or Woody Phillips, the former treasurer, like, even if you find that they did something wrong, doesn't mean that what they did wrong should lead to the end of the NRA, right, as an institution. So that's interesting. And it's the first time they've done this. They've made this argument. But I don't know that it means, Wayne's on his way out or anything like that. I'm sure some people will interpret it that way, but I kind of doubt that is the actual takeaway from this. It's more of a due diligence sort of thing in my mind. But people can read more on that if they're members, right? If they join, which you should do that. You should join. Yes. We have a monthly membership, $10 a month or $100 for a year. So you get 2 months off with the annual. And then there's also a lifetime membership. If you want to help the Reload grow, if you want to help it sustain it, you believe in this sober, serious approach to journalism, informed approach to gun reporting, that's the best way to provide for the future of this publication. We are 100% reader funded as things stand now, and we are completely independent of any gun group or any corporation or anything else. So if you want to help us continue our reporting, that's how you can do it. Speaking of which, we have another story that hasn't gotten any real attention that you wrote this week, Jake, on California. They've passed a new law. What does the law do? Yeah, so it was kind of a last-minute law that they passed at the end of their legislative session. It was in a budget bill, actually. But what the law stipulates is that all transactions of ammunition, firearm parts, basically any firearm transaction, because they're already registered in the state of California, well, the California DOJ is now responsible for sharing that information with a newly established gun violence research center at the University of California, Davis. So that means that people that purchase ammunition, you go in, you do your background check, give your name, your address, all types of personal information. Well, all of that will now be available to gun violence researchers at UC Davis, and the law stipulates it can go to any other accredited higher education institution. So theoretically, that could be
any college in the country could have
Any
your personal
college
information.
that's accredited by the Department of Education could get
Right.
this information. It could request it. And it's basically all of gun owners in California's personal information, like their name, their date of birth, their address, their phone numbers,
Right.
like everything.
It's a big deal.
Every possible thing. And it's really remarkable because this was not something that got a lot of attention in the lead up to it passing.
Right.
And it hasn't gotten the governor signed it yesterday as of the recording of this, so Thursday. And it's remarkable to me. Like that's a lot of information for a lot of people, and they didn't do anything wrong either. These are just people who've legally bought guns in California or ammunition,
Right.
and now
you'd expect-
also like gun parts too are on the list.
Correct.
Now, too.
Correct. Yeah, what they call firearm precursor parts. So your receivers, your slides, anything that you can use to build a gun. Now, anytime you buy any of those individual pieces, your information will be shared with these research institutions, which is interesting. Like you said, you would expect gun groups to be all over this. You'd expect gun outlets to be all over this. You would even expect
privacy advocates.
Yes,
too.
civil liberties places you would expect to be all over this because this is a big breach of privacy. You're sharing personal information for people purchasing lawful goods to institutions all across the country. So yeah, it's a big law.
Any college, basically, is from the way the law is written,
Sure.
they could send this to any college in the country who asked for it. And I mean, it'd be pretty remarkable enough if it was just this one center at UC Davis, but it's literally any college or university in the entire country. And it doesn't appear that there's any sort of, they have some protections on, the researchers can't republish the information under the law, I suppose.
Correct. Yeah. When they publish anything, it can't include the personal identifying information. So that's the only stipulation that protects people's identities. But
yeah. And there doesn't seem to be any sort of mechanism in the law for how this information is going to be kept confidential when it's being shared
Right.
across the country with every college or university who asks for it.
well, and we've seen in other cases,
there's
gun
a lot
owners,
of questions to be answered there.
We've seen in other instances, in England, a big story broke a couple weeks ago where their entire gun owners registry got leaked somehow to the media. So we've seen it happen time and time again. Even when things are supposed to be kept private, they can still get out. There's still privacy concerns. So
Yeah, I believe there was a newspaper in New York who published the addresses of all the gun owners in its area. And it's just remarkably unfair, I think, to people who have done nothing wrong. You're talking about people who have gone through the legal process of buying a
Right.
gun or ammunition in California.
Right.
Not people with criminal records or anything like that. They're not sharing criminal records. They're just sharing they're identifying information of everyone who's legally bought a gun in the state. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes if if the gun rights groups out in California file suit, and where this ends up and how it interacts with the state's privacy protections that exist in California. I believe there's even a constitutional amendment about privacy there. So
yeah, Article 1 in
we'll
their
have to
state
see.
constitution.
Yeah, we'll have to see how this plays out. But there was also another California development this week in San Diego, right?
Sure. Yeah. So yesterday, as recording this podcast, so Thursday, the San Diego mayor signed into law an ordinance that bans ghost guns, which for their purposes is any unserialized receiver or an unserialized firearm is automatically.
And this goes further than the state law that they've instituted
Correct.
recently,
So
right?
this completely bans the possession and sale of any of that, whereas the state law, you can still purchase them, but it just requires that you register it and get a serial number with the State Department of Justice. So this, city ordinance goes further than that.
That makes it a misdemeanor, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, and that actually dovetails well with the interview we've got coming up here. As I mentioned earlier, the head of San Diego County gun owners is on with us to talk a little bit about local activism, their approach to activism, which I think is fairly unique from some, the way that other groups have operated, and some of the successes that they've had, even in a place like San Diego, California, which is obviously very deep blue, and their mayor is passing his own gun ordinances. So we're going to move over to that now, actually, and take it away, me in the future / past when I actually recorded this interview. All right, I'm here with Wendy Hoffman of the San Diego County Gun Owners group, which has done a lot of good work out in San Diego, California. Wendy, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself for listeners who might not have heard of you or your group before?
Sure. I'm the CEO of San Diego County Gun Owners. We're a political action committee focused on Second Amendment rights just at the city and county level. I'm also the program director for our women's mentorship program called Not Me. We have a couple of chapters throughout the state. We have one in San Diego, one in Riverside County, and one in Orange County. I'm also an instructor, NRA certified, and a couple of other certification processes as well. And I've been doing that for about 7 or 8 years now.
Wow, wonderful. And can you tell us a little bit more about the Not Me program? How many women have been involved over the last few years here? What is the goal, and how are you guys carrying that out?
Sure. So about a little over 2 years ago, I created this program. It's a women's one-on-one mentorship program. The idea is that we create a space for women to be able to ask all the questions that anybody might have about becoming a gun owner, about purchasing and selecting a firearm, about getting the right kind of training, and about getting a concealed carry permit. So a lot of this was built on my own experiences becoming a gun owner. When I first got into guns, I was pretty much the only gun owner I knew. So I didn't know where to ask questions. Going on Google has very hit or miss results. Right. Sometimes they're accurate. Sometimes you get a bunch of weird answers. And even like going to gun shops, I would get really good information, or I would get really condescending information, or anywhere in between. So my idea was to pair up experienced female gun owners who have gone through the process already, and they help out someone who is just starting to explore gun ownership. So it might be answering questions about what kind of gun to pick, why a semi-automatic versus a revolver, a small gun versus a big gun, what caliber, where can I find training, do I want to go get training with the Navy SEAL, or do I need to fly to Arizona and spend $1,000 on a gun sight class, that kind of stuff. Those are really basic questions that take a lot of time to explore and realize what is good information and what is bad. So we just want to be able to provide a comfortable environment for women to ask those questions for women who have already gone through that.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And so you said you've had 500 women go through this program. Is that correct?
Yeah. So in San Diego, we're just about to hit 500, and then we've also got a handful in Orange County and a handful in Riverside. Mm.
And so why do you think it's been so successful? I guess it's that approach that is a bit unique compared to a lot of these other programs that you discussed. Do you think there's a certain benefit to having women teaching women that sort of maybe lowers some of the barrier for entry for a lot of women? Is that something that comes across or that you notice when you're doing these things?
Absolutely. I think that's a really big part of it. That one of the things that I hear all the time from brand new female gun owners is that they don't want to be the only woman in the room. They don't want to be by themselves. They don't want to look like they have no idea what they're talking about when they go to a gun class. And that's a very normal response for people. But for a woman to step out of the comfort zone and step into a firearms industry, it's super intimidating. And to be able to lower that bar just a little bit has helped a lot. The other thing is obviously the environment over the last 2 years has been really wild. It's been a crazy roller coaster, and a lot of people who were on the fence about gun ownership are now really, really interested about buying a gun.
Yeah, so you've experienced that surge as well in your training programs, where you've seen more people coming in to get training over the last year and a half, when the pandemic started back in March 2020, and there was the rioting and there's food shortages and all these things that we had to deal with that led to a lot of gun purchases. You've also seen it lead to a lot of people interested in gun training as well.
Very much. We also had the unique experience of having a riot here in San Diego County. I live just a couple miles from where a very large riot occurred. The police department was stormed, City Hall was broken into. These rioters broke into every store inside a shopping center. They set a couple of buildings on fire. Especially the people who lived near there, and also even people who live in the county but didn't live near there, they never thought that this would happen in their backyard. And so that made a lot of people realize, hey, I need to be able to defend myself. There were people calling the police, and they were just like, I'm sorry, we can't help you right now.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that would motivate quite a few people to want to, I guess, do what they can to protect themselves at that point. And then you're Asian American as well, obviously, and there've been certainly an increase in hate crimes directed towards Asian Americans. Have you noticed that community coming out to trainings more as well?
As an overall community, yes, I would say so. In San Diego specifically, and through our program, I think it probably reflects what's going on in the rest of the country. Not a huge increase here specifically in San Diego, but there's definitely a very big concern about personal safety for Asian Americans. Sure,
certainly. And I know there have been a couple of Asian American groups that have come on to this, gun rights groups that have come onto the scene lately as well, for that general movement towards gun ownership in the Asian American community. But what other thing that's interesting, you guys were featured in the Wall Street Journal's recent piece, where they talked about a study that indicates 50% of new gun owners are women, which is a huge increase over what has traditionally been the case with gun ownership in America. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that means going forward, I think, for the gun industry, for the gun owning community, for America generally? What does this new trend say, I think, about where we're headed?
I think it says that women are starting to be more involved in decisions about home defense. I think in a traditional household, it's typically the man's role to take care of a defensive plan, for example. But now the women are seeing what's going on across the country and really taking charge and ownership of being able to participate in that home defense plan. Not only that, because a lot of the women that I work with are women who, for example, the husbands are active duty military, or they're law enforcement, or maybe they just have a really busy work schedule, and so the woman is home by herself a lot. And so in that situation, she's the one who's going to need to be able to protect herself with a firearm at home. The trajectory for the industry, I think, being able to focus on women as a legitimate demographic of customers, it's been getting a lot better over the last couple of years, but I think that the industry is going to really need to be able to step it up over the next 5 years, for example. There was a trend for a while. I think the nickname was to pink it and shrink it. And, that only goes so far. shrinking it does not make it easier to shoot. It makes it harder to shoot.
Right. That's a common misconception, right? Is people
Exactly.
think
And
the gun being smaller means it's easier or it's for women or something. And that's really
but
not
it
true at all.
doesn't. Yeah, it makes it harder and more uncomfortable and harder to handle.
Yes.
So
the smaller the gun, the less mass, the more recoil you get.
exactly. So we are seeing a lot more female-friendly guns. Like for example, the EZ, which is the Smith & Wesson M&P EZ, which is got a lot easier slide to rack, more guns that are designed for the ergonomics for women's hands. Those kinds of things, they've been getting better. Now, the problem, of course, here in California is that we have a roster of handguns approved for sale, and there haven't been any new guns added on that in many, many years. So we don't have access to any of these new guns, which is, I think, a really big problem.
Yeah. Yeah, no, certainly. And, I've handled the EZ, and I kind of wonder why they don't apply that technology to more guns. I mean, the slide on that gun is remarkable in how easy it is to manipulate. And I think that a lot of people, obviously it's beneficial to women who are, on average smaller than men. But I just feel like it's an advantage for almost anyone. Like I'm not sure what the downside is to that slide. I'm not aware of any, frankly, to that design that they've incorporated into that gun. But the upside seems very obvious, right? And that it's much easier to rack, which
I
is
would agree.
an advantage to everyone. But yeah, so you want to see more innovations along those lines, right? You want to see more guns adapted to or designed with women in mind, right? What other sorts of changes or advancements do you want to see from either the industry or perhaps the gun rights movement as a whole? Like what are some things that you think could be done to make gun ownership more appealing to women than it's already becoming, and political activism more inviting to female gun owners?
Wow, that's a loaded question. I think.
Or do you think that things are already going well in that direction? I mean, I don't want to draw conclusions, right?
Well, I think within the industry, I think they're doing a really good job of moving in that direction of normalizing gun ownership and moving towards marketing that is more appropriate towards both men and women. There's less bikinis and more men and fully dressed women in the advertisements. But I think that being accessible and relatable in media is going to be the biggest struggle. Now, if I go pick up a gun magazine, it's full of guns, and that is the point of the magazine. I get that. Right. But it's also really intimidating for a woman who is just starting to explore gun ownership. So I think the introductory level education as an industry overall, there are a lot of resources, but I feel like depending on where you are, it's not as accessible. And that's basically the basis for our program, because we, it's all free. All of our ambassadors, who are the mentors, we call them ambassadors, they're all volunteers, and all they're doing is just sharing some experience that they've already gone through and, creating this comfortable space where they can refer them to reliable resources. So I personally would love to see this program all over the country. It's super easy to implement. It's all volunteer based, and being able to create that low bar of entry, like we were talking about earlier, is such a key to getting more people, especially more women, involved in the industry.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as far as the political activism side of things goes, you guys have been fairly active. Your mayor there in San Diego just recently signed actually the day that we're filming this, he signed a ghost gun ban, or so-called, ghost gun. I guess it would make it a misdemeanor to possess an unfinished firearm frame or receiver if it doesn't have a serial number engraved into it. This is part of a larger effort, both nationally and specifically in California, where they've passed laws requiring people to register their homemade firearms. So, your group is obviously in an area of the country that is fairly hostile towards gun owners. Obviously, you mentioned earlier the roster, the handgun roster. You can only own handguns that are approved by the state as safe, which they haven't updated the list in years, even though guns now are oftentimes much safer than some of the guns on the list in a practical sense of their actual operation.
Yeah.
And obviously they allow police officers to carry some of these unsafe, I guess, presumably unsafe firearms that they won't let civilians purchase or own. So what is your activism for your group looked like? What are you doing to try and affect change in this area of the country that it is relatively hostile to what your goals are?
So the ghost gun ban is a really good example of how the laws that are being created here in California and at the local level are spreading throughout the country. A lot of the anti-gun legislation that is in the Senate and the House right now, they're all based on ideas that started here in California. So it's really important to be able to make change at a local level. So we only work on city level and county level politics. And I think it's really important to focus at that level because the politicians that are at the state level and federal level, I would say the vast majority of them started at some sort of city council or even a school board or a water board. They're the ones who are going to move to office and make decisions about firearms and make laws like the roster that make no sense to anyone who knows anything about guns. So it's really important to get involved at the local level. What our organization does is we organize the Second Amendment community. We create a voice for the average gun owner. We're not all, camo wearing middle-aged white guys who are hunting, although, we have members that do that.
Sure.
But we're all average gun owners and we're all law-abiding citizens who just want to be able to protect ourselves. So one example is we placed political pressure on the sheriff about 5 years ago. He was running for re-election and he was previously not issuing CCWs. Mm-hmm. So in our county, we had about 3.4 million residents. We had just over 1,000 permits at the time. That's a very small number for how big of a county we are.
Right.
But through several channels of political pressure, through going after his donors, holding up endorsements, telling the media that he has the ultimate authority to decide when and where to issue. We endorsed his opponent, who was an openly gay Democrat who said that he would issue CCWs for self-defense. So he's running against an openly gay, pro-gun Democrat. And, all of this kind of came together. And he ultimately changed his mind. He turned around his CCW policy 180 degrees. Previously, they were turning people away before people could even apply. And now the clerks are welcoming people in, helping them modify their applications to make sure that they get approved. They have increased their staff. They have added software to make the process quicker. Over the last 5 years, we've seen a quadruple in the number of permits that have been issued.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's very impressive. I mean, because obviously most of the time in California, you're relying on things like legal cases to win back some of these rights that have been restricted over the years, either at the county or the state level. And, there was a famous case in California, Peruta, that almost made it to the Supreme Court that dealt with California's May issue ban. And actually, of course, right now there is a case in front of the Supreme Court about New York's May issue law, which is fairly similar to California's. So, you might end up having another court case help some backup there soon. But it is interesting to see how this sort of local activism that you guys have put together there in San Diego has had a real world impact on, a sheriff that had been restrictive in how he treated applicants for concealed carry law permits, and now has changed his point of view or his practice because of your local activism focused on. It sounds like an approach that's zeroed in specifically and only on gun policy, which I think is interesting just because of some of the ways that other gun rights groups have taken a more holistic approach, I guess, to activism, and perhaps they're not getting involved legally or with money in other issues, but they're oftentimes identifying non-gun issues with gun ownership, if that makes sense. It's sort of an identity approach, trying to get people more involved in their fight by appealing to their other parts of their politics, for their core demographic of, who they want to become activists. So they might, appeal to somebody's, country fandom or something, of country music fandom, or whatever, in addition to their desire to protect gun rights. Whereas they might not be as interested in endorsing a Democrat who is, gay or who supports a number of different issues that don't have anything to do with guns, but don't line up with what a lot of your traditional gun owners believe in. It sounds like you've taken a bit of a different approach in just laser focusing on the issue, and that had a real impact. Is that a fair assessment of how you guys went about doing things, and do you see it as a alternative approach that's been successful for you?
I think it's actually one of the keys to our success is that all we focus on is the Second Amendment. We don't focus on any other issues. Being able to be relatable about just that one issue allows us to not get involved in any of the other issues, because all we care about as an organization is the Second Amendment. Interestingly, though, that Peruta case you just mentioned, that was actually a case against our sheriff, that same sheriff who denied permits for 10 years. And,
so the legal case didn't work, right?
No, it didn't. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it put pressure on it, but it didn't, the legal case didn't come out in your favor.
That's correct.
But you were able to, anyway, through local activism, change his position.
Yeah, and it just shows that while litigation is a crucial part of any activism plan, that it can't be the end-all and be-all. It took 10 years in court for Sheriff Gore to actually win in court. And so that was 10 years in court with no favorable result. So we can't rely on litigation. We have to be able to make change at the local level and not rely on a court case, which could take upwards of 10 years.
Yeah, no.
That being said, we are involved in litigation, but
sure,
it can't be the only
it's
thing.
not to say that court cases aren't important. And like I mentioned earlier, there is a Supreme Court case on. They have finally taken up a May issue gun carry case. Yes. May issue, for anyone who's listening that doesn't necessarily know, is where essentially government officials like the county sheriff have discretion over whether or not they want to issue a permit, even if a person has passed the hurdles in the law. So even if they've passed the background check and completed the training that's required they can still be denied if the local government official does not, the one who's in charge of issuing permits doesn't believe they have a good reason to have a permit, or they can, in New York's case, the laws are a little different. New York has they'll issue you a permit, but then they'll say you can only use it in certain circumstances, which don't apply to most public areas. And so, you guys are a really interesting case to me, because I think a lot of the new gun owners who've come into the fold over the last year and a half, all these, if NSSF's estimates are to be believed, it's, something like almost 12 million new gun owners in the past year and a half. I wonder what the effect of that is going to be. And I don't think it's going to be that people are going to suddenly switch from being, party line Democrat voters to party line Republican voters, even if they start to change their mind on guns. And that's why this approach that you're talking about here and the success of it is intriguing to me, because I feel like that's the more realistic expectation for how new gun owners who have traditionally voted for Democrats or not traditionally been, Republican voters, that obviously doesn't necessarily mean they're party line Democratic voters, but that's a more realistic view of how they will have an impact long term on the politics of guns. And I think the way that your group has approached this issue with concealed carry permits in San Diego, and the success that you had, is really a shining example of that. It just really shows what's possible for these kind of new gun owners, and how you, bring them into the gun rights community, and don't necessarily expect them to become, a party line hardcore Republican voter, or even NRA member or whatever. There's still a significant role that they can play, or that they will play, in affecting gun politics by moving perhaps the Democratic Party back towards more pro-gun policies than they're like. Do you think that's a fair assessment? Do you think that's a realistic view that I just put out there? Is that something that you've taken away from your experience?
I think that with gun ownership, it is something that people are so passionate about that they tend to be, that it tends to be a deciding factor. So if there is someone who they don't really have an opinion about between, two candidates, for example, if one of them is pro-gun and one of them isn't, they're going to vote for the pro-gun candidate. So there's enough either single issue voters or indifferent voters who care a little bit about guns that I think it does make a really big difference. Yeah,
that's, because I think the expectation, was, there's all these new gun owners. So, Joe Biden is very anti-gun, or he wants to enact a lot of new gun control, and Donald Trump is rhetorically is very pro-gun, and he's endorsed by the NRA, and all this stuff. So clearly, all those new gun owners are going to immediately vote for Donald Trump, and he's going to win the election. Or you could replace any of these candidates in any race, and I don't think it works quite that way. Mm-hmm. One, I think it takes a while for someone who especially in the midst of chaos, who's concerned about their safety, goes out and buys a gun. They're not immediately thinking about politics of that decision, within the next month or two of doing it. So it takes time, and then not all of those people will become single issue gun voters, or will, just because they change their mind on guns, will change their mind on all of the litany of other issues that people make up their minds on when it comes to voting for candidates. But it just seems to me that probably enough of them will change their point of view on the gun issue in particular, that it could have an effect not just on Republicans beating Democrats, but on Democrats changing their positions on guns, like you've been able to have happen with the sheriff in San Diego County. Like that just seems to me like a more realistic view of the long-term effect of these new gun owners. And someone like you and what your organization is doing are kind of the conduits for that action, to take somebody who just bought a gun because they were worried about their home getting broken into during the riot in San Diego, and taking them to be more of a regular user of their gun, getting training, going to the range, making some other friends who own guns, and then from there moving perhaps into more of the activism side of things, working at the county level to, endorse this sheriff candidate over this sheriff candidate because he has a better policy on issuing concealed carry licenses. Like that seems like a more natural and realistic progression for a new gun owner who wasn't previously voting on gun rights to become somebody who is voting on gun rights. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the other thing there too is that as they become new gun owners, they realize that the narrative about how easy it is to get a gun and all of the loopholes that exist, I think they realize that those don't really exist. They're not really there. It is really hard to get a gun in California.
Right.
The average non-gun owner probably believes that our government isn't trying to take away our guns. But then you really get more into learning about how many gun laws there are and how difficult it is to be a lawful gun owner in California. Then they start seeing, okay, there are so many laws that are only there for the purpose of making it harder to become a law-abiding gun owner. So, like the roster, for example, it's just the way that it's written right now, it's impossible to have any new guns added to the roster. So there's no good reason to have this roster anymore. You're not limiting the sale of guns that are safe, quote unquote, to Californians. What you're doing is keeping us from being able to have access to the technology that's been developed over the last 15 years. Does that make us safer? Because I don't think it does. I think it actually makes us less safe. We're limited to the amount of guns that we have access to. A woman with small hands of small stature in California who wants a gun for concealed carry has like 2 options on the roster, and that's not acceptable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are very legitimate complaints that you have there, and I imagine you will continue to push forward on changing things in San Diego County and California at large. If somebody wants to get involved with your group, how can they do that? What's the best way?
We have lots of opportunities. You can check out our website. It's SanDiegoCountyGunOwners.com. You can find all of our social media platforms there. Sign up for our email newsletter. We do new shooter events. We have our women's mentoring program. We promote the organization at gun shops all over the county. There are definitely tons of ways to get involved in a really easy way. And, you can donate time or you can donate money as well. So we're a membership-based organization. You can contribute $10 a month is our basic level of membership. And that just helps make sure that we have paid full-time staff who are working on Second Amendment rights all the time at the local level.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us and giving us your time. This is a really interesting conversation, and I hope you'll come back again in the future to update us.
Anytime. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm here with Reload member Brian Stubbe to do the new episode of this segment that I really enjoy doing a lot, actually, where we meet some of the Reload members and find out who they are, what they like, what their background is, how they got into guns, why they subscribe to the Reload, that sort of thing. I want to really kind of take a look at our own community of members And so, yeah, Brian, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed this segment, and I thought it was really cool that I had a chance to come on and talk too. I'm kind of new to the firearms community. I got into it about 3 years ago as an activity to do with my father-in-law, and I found it was more important too to me now that I moved from the city into the suburbs and felt a little more responsibility to take to protect my house and my family.
Oh, okay. So, so what was your first gun? What was your first shooting experience? You said it was only a couple of years ago, right? When you started
Yes.
sort of like a family building exercise kind of deal. What did you do?
So actually, my brother-in-law, I used his, I think, Glock 34 for my first experience at a range. So that was like a longer pistol, easier to shoot. And then I think my first one ended up being a CZ P10C 9mm pistol. And that's still actually my favorite handgun. It's a really nice trigger, easy to shoot.
Do you have your own guns now?
Yeah. So actually, last year I ended up buying a few different ones. I bought a rifle, like a AR type rifle, and a bolt action rifle as well, and then a smaller pistol for everyday carry because I'm 5'9", I'm like 150 pounds, so it's hard for me to hide a full size one with the clothes I wear.
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm 6'1" and like 255, and I still carry a subcompact 9mm. So
Nice.
no shame there. Just easier to conceal with regardless of what you're wearing. Especially with the right kind of holster and setup. But so that's pretty fast transition. You went from not. Had you ever shot before? A couple of years ago, or was that really your first time even shooting at all?
I think once in Las Vegas for a bachelor party trip, we went somewhere where you could shoot like full auto.
Nice.
Yeah, and that was it. That was it until 3 years ago.
Yeah, those places are fun. I've been to a bunch of those, but
I have to go again now that I know something about firearms, because back then it was just like quick and intense experience, and now I think I'll get more out of it.
Oh yeah, those are great. And honestly, I've always thought those were counterintuitively a really good way to introduce somebody to shooting if they don't have if you don't have somebody who's like a experienced shooter that can teach you. I mean, obviously you go to a trainer, and that's ideal. Yeah. But otherwise, like if you just want to try out shooting and you don't have someone to go with, those attraction places in Vegas or Orlando, there's a lot of them around, are a pretty good way to get started because one, they have not just a range safety officer watching everyone shoot, but they have an individual range safety officer for every group, and they will walk you through the process of shooting and supervise you while you do it. So that's safer than if you just tried to go to a range by yourself and rent a gun without any assistance and you've never shot before. Obviously that can be a very irresponsible thing to do. So, and then on top of that, you also get the experience of shooting full auto, which is exhilarating and fun for most people. And so you can have that range of experience in a relatively, a very safe environment compared to some of the alternatives for first-time shooters who don't have somebody who can take them shooting. But yeah, so you went from doing the attraction, stuff in Vegas to shooting for the first time with your father-in-law to now you carry a firearm. That's pretty quick transition over just a couple of years. Not that that's uncommon, but I find that interesting. So you made that jump from just getting into shooting as something to do with your family, and now it's something that you also rely on for self-protection to the point where you actually got a permit and you carry a gun on you, on your person when you're out in public, or at least, so I don't know. Yeah. You don't need to disclose your full routine or anything, but that's just an interesting progression there.
Yeah, and I remember when my father-in-law first said he was going to get a permit to carry, I was like, why? Why would you ever need to? It just seems kind of scary and crazy. And then a few months later, I got my own permit. And what helped a lot also was watching videos on YouTube. Like Active Self-Protection is a great channel teaching about
great podcast too, by the way.
Which
features which I get
features you.
Yeah, But
Which
yeah,
is a great crossover, a great partnership there.
thanks. Yeah, no, absolutely. Though that's interesting too, because that's kind of a new resource over the last decade or so, having real and quality advice and training available online. As a resource in addition to what you can get in person at a range. Obviously, it's not a replacement necessarily for in-person training, but it's a new resource that I think a lot of new shooters like yourself have gotten into, and then that I personally have used a lot myself as well, including specifically active self-protection, because that gives you a really good insight into the reality of armed self-defense and the reality of the dangers that exist in the world, every day for everyone. So that's really cool. So you started you started shooting, you started doing some research online, watching active self-protection videos, and that changed your mind from what I think is a very common, honestly, view of carrying a gun every day, which is, why would you need to do that? Why would you what do you need a gun for when you go into the grocery store, right? That's how I think most people approach the concept of gun carry, and that changed your perspective towards one of maybe a preparedness, even though, a violent event might be rare, it's not impossible.
Yeah.
Is that an accurate, assessment of how things went for you?
Yeah, that's fair. And just seeing what can happen to people, like everyday people in everyday circumstances. And then, it also taught me about carrying one in the chamber, which took some time for me to feel comfortable with.
Sure.
But if you're in a circumstance where your life is in danger or someone's life is in danger, you don't want to take that extra time to chamber around. And then also I found that channel very helpful, and similar videos very helpful for understanding the complexities legally that you need to know when you're carrying. Like when it's not dedicated to legal issues, but whether or not you're allowed to pull your gun in a way that's not brandishing or is brandishing. There's important things to know there. And
Right.
there are a lot of cases, kind of famous ones lately, like the Ahmaud Arbery case, and then also the McCloskeys in St. Louis. If you look at it in different situations or different ways, you might think like one or the other party might be okay or allowed, but to do what they were doing, but you need to know like the full context. And as a carrier, you need to be aware of all the complexities there, so you don't screw yourself. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's like a duty that you have to be responsible when you're carrying a firearm,
right?
In public. It's not a toy, obviously, and so you need to understand the responsibilities that come along with that, in addition to the rights that you have to exercise that ability. But I find that really interesting. So what, as well, in addition to that stuff, so you got into shooting, you got into learning more about concealed carry and armed self-defense. What got you into more following gun news or gun politics, subscribing to the Reload? What was the progression there?
Yeah, good question. It happened bit by bit. I probably found you through some of the National Review former colleagues, potentially. The colleagues of yours in the past, or just friends?
National Review, yeah.
Yeah, and just like I found that following individuals for news and content, you can learn to trust them better, or whether they're trustworthy or not. I found those people to be reliable, to like tell the facts truthfully, and sure they'll have opinions, but there won't be too much spin. And then so that led me to you as someone potentially trustworthy, and I've found you definitely to be the case. And so I wanted to support that kind of content, and it's also very useful to just follow.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think I say this a lot on the podcast, right? But and in my tweets, but really the members are what makes this whole thing possible. The Reload is 100% funded by members, and it wouldn't be able to exist without them, and so I think it is really key that people who want to see more independent firearms journalism that's done with this serious approach that that I've tried to take, I really do need their help and their support. So I'm always glad when somebody, it makes that commitment to support what I'm doing with the Reload, and hopefully also get valuable insights in return. Get value from the exclusive posts and the Sunday newsletter that's exclusive for members, and the early access to the podcast and so forth. But that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this segment, is just to see what is it that drove people to want to help create something like this, or help sustain and grow something like the Reload. And so that's really interesting. And I think that's mirrors my approach a lot to how I consume news, which is less about what outlet somebody works for. Now, obviously, there's outliers here, like InfoWars. I'm not going to take stuff that somebody's writing for. If you write for InfoWars, that's not going to be a good mark in my book of credibility. But I find following the individual writers to be more useful in this day and age than just judging off of what outlet they're publishing for, within reason, right? And so, I guess that's probably part of the reason why the Reload can exist at all, is that sort of new approach, or I don't know if it's new, but that kind of approach to journalism, and to vetting your sources, being able to follow what how their career has gone, and whether you can judge their credibility and their. I
think as a consumer also, it's something actually I enjoy finding people doing good work that I can support. I find it more meaningful than just buying a subscription to a newspaper or something.
Yeah, that makes sense too, right? I mean, certainly your subscription has a much bigger impact on whether or not the Reload exists than if you were to buy a subscription to the New York Times or the Washington Post or something. So obviously, certainly the individual impact is much larger on a publication like the Reload. But yeah, I mean, I really appreciate your support personally, and then the support of the members generally, and I hope to have a lot more members on in the future to do this segment, because I really find it fascinating. It's interesting to talk to the actual community that we're building here. So I really appreciate you coming on, and yeah, I hope to have more members on like you very soon.
Well, thank you for the work you do. Awesome story on the ATF, and hopefully, many more to come.
Hey, that's your support makes our journalism possible. So, the members are just as responsible for the impact of our reporting as I am. So, yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, that's it for this episode of the Weekly Reload podcast. Remember, if you join, you get this podcast a day early, like all the other members. It's a big perk. It's wonderful. And in addition to that, you also get access exclusively to certain content, like my recent analysis piece on what the NRA putting distance between itself and Wayne LaPierre in a recent court filing actually means. Where's that going? Why did that happen? Find out if you subscribe and read the piece. Anyway, I'll see you guys again on the next episode.
I made the devil run. I gave him poison just for fun. I had one friend, now there's none. I made the devil run. I broke so many bones, but none of them were ever my